I'm in my feels right now. That was very
Oh,
touching. You hit me nail on the head with all of that stuff.
greetings, humans, and welcome to the 13th episode of the Anti-Professional Podcast, where I am meeting with Caleb Nelson to talk about the Naked Sunday podcast, ambition, both of us surviving cults, the ethics of being a leader, and also we just share some good moments of being fellow ambitious weirdos who are trying to have a positive, heart-centered impact on the world. So if that's who you are, maybe you'll like this podcast. As always, this podcast is sponsored by identitypending.com, my digital marketing agency, where we solve technical and creative problems for bold businesses. I'll also remind you that my book, A Pocket Full of Seeds, is out now and available on Amazon for you to buy if you would like to read it and cry. And without further ado, let's get into it. All right. Greetings, humans, and welcome to the 13th episode of the Anti-Professional Podcast, where I'm here with Caleb Nelson, host of the Naked Sunday podcast, which I have been lucky to be a guest on. And as is now tradition, I will be opening with a poem that I wrote for Caleb 5 minutes ago, which goes like this. Caleb shows us how we can be naked with our joy and our sorrow, our love and our hatred, our bodies, our minds, our space and our time, working and resting before the next climb. Fate brings us together. We don't get to know why. We just know that we're humans with multitudes inside. What I love about learning to love myself is learning that I contain heaven and hell, and neither is better, neither is worse, non-dual, non-binary rhythm and verse. The flow of existence, the ebb of the tides, conversations pollinated, and souls along for the ride. If you're hearing this now, I invite you to thrive by knowing and loving the one you call I. This one was a weird one, but I hope it hits home. So now that I'm done, welcome Caleb to the show.
That was fire.
Thank
I
you.
need to get something as awesome as that because that was I'm in my feels right now. That was very
Oh,
touching. You hit me nail on the head with all of that stuff. I've been writing about like spirituality and all these other things. So wow, man, I was already excited to come hang out with you, but damn,
well, I'm glad. I hope
fireworks.
that's the hope. I like to think of it as like an opening spell to like bring in all the energy for whatever the heck we're doing here.
Very cool.
But with that introduction, would you like to tell us who are you and what do you stand for?
For sure. Well, my name's Caleb Nelson. As you mentioned, I'm the owner of Naked Sunday podcast, or the host of that. For work, what do we say I actually do for making money, or however that goes down? I do health and performance coaching for what I consider heart-centered leaders who want to have more impact. And for me, why I do all of that essentially in terms of what I stand for is that I think we need better leaders in this world, and I hope to do my small part in allowing those people who want to give so much have better time and energy so that they can give their love to everybody else. And I think that we can be a little closer to hopefully maybe one day having a world of peace. I don't know. That'd be a nice thing. So that's me.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive into all of that more with you. And I first have to ask, for the people who don't know you, why is it called Naked Sunday?
Ooh, Naked Sunday well, I haven't done it exactly in the way that it originally started, but I sat butt naked every Sunday for I couldn't even tell you how long. So it was a habit. And as practical as it sounds, just sat alone with myself. And then eventually I brought my wife into it. And essentially this practice comes down to a reflection on being very honest with yourself. And the number one question that I would continue to sit with was, why do I love myself? And I didn't realize before I started this that I was going to go on that journey. And when I first sat down and I looked at myself, and I was about 40 pounds overweight at the time, I had owned a facility, a gym for, I don't know, 10 years, something like that.
Mm.
And here I was feeling like a big hypocrite. I didn't even realize, like, wow, I really don't even like myself, let alone love. I can't even answer the question, I love myself. So Naked Sunday was a journey, as you had mentioned in that beautiful poem, of learning to love all that is me. And also in the same breath, in an ironic way, learning how to see that love in everybody else, enemies, friends, and otherwise. So that's Naked Sunday.
So then I'm curious, like within the theme of the show, you're a gym owner, but you're feeling like, I'm assuming you're feeling pretty successful, but you don't really feel happy inside. Do you feel like there was a pressure to be like an archetype or a type of man that was leading you to that dissatisfaction?
Great question. Um, for most of my life, I have been what I would consider what they call the high performer, be a good student, be a good athlete, whatever. I think I mentioned very, very briefly when you hopped on my show. I grew up in a cult, so a lot of like rigid dogmas around right, wrong, good, bad,
Mm.
and to that effect with the gym, it became very much like only shining the surface. I internally, though I didn't realize it at the time, had been essentially pursuing validation in all ways external. So I wanted to be able to say, "Oh, I've got, the arm candy, Barbie wife,
Mm.
girlfriend, whatever. I've got the big gym. I've got the 6 pack abs, all that stuff to basically say, F you, I'm awesome and
Hmm.
get, approval." Uh, and a few things happened, not least of which my father almost dying. Um, and I had to confront the man in the mirror. I was just never happy. I was never internally at peace with myself. So in many ways, yes, I had all this stuff. I had accumulated a bunch of things, but there was no substance, and I was feeling like I had to fit a certain mold. I have to be a certain way. And I'm somebody, I like to talk about my feelings. I like to talk about spirituality. I like to talk about things of depth, where in that kind of world is, we're going to talk about things like macros and food and things like that. And those are
Mm.
all cool. But the substance, the feelings, and it took me a long time to get to that place. Ironically, it became more of a training ground for me to learn how to become comfortable with having those conversations. Because in our space, one day we could be talking about sex, the next day about drugs, the next day about politics, next day about religion, the next day about parenting strategies amongst people of all different backgrounds, conservative or otherwise, liberal, name your thing. Name your red, white, blue, green, anything, all the stuff. And people could just get along and
Mm.
could have a meaningful open discussion. And I was a little afraid of like, wow, like this kind of power is here. And I was afraid of sitting with that. I was like, do people really care about this?
Mm.
Probably my own insecurities underneath that of like, I didn't want to become a cult leader myself. So like you start talking about these deep intrinsic things, getting that power under you, you better have your head and heart screwed on pretty straight. So um, I don't know how I went on that riff, but that's
Hmm.
that in many ways. Yeah. The physical body fell out of alignment because I lost the sense of who I was and who do I want to be as at that time recently married, looking to the future as like if I want to be a father, like what kind of spouse, what kind of parent do I want to be? And the way I was currently living was not in alignment with that. And as I needed to get sorted out on who I was and
Mm.
also what my purpose was, what that would evolving was, I realized I had lost the respect in terms of behaviors towards my body. And that was the journey back. Naked Sunday.
And do you feel like as you sort of had that realization and decided you were going to do something different, were there things that you had to accept about yourself that were kind of hard to be seen? You know, like were there parts of yourself that you kept hidden for a long time, like that emotional depth and that, spiritual curiosity? Like were those sort of blunted or numbed out for a long time?
Yeah, not as openly as I'd wanted to, because uh, I was very good, and it's still at times when I'm feeling insecure within myself, great at arm's distance, real fast. Um, that the gym, ironically, was my safe space. I could control the narrative. I can control the things. And as we closed that space, and I drifted off into the universe with just this naked Sunday concept, I had to start to get more comfortable with that at a bigger scale. I think that that's where my biggest fears were lying. Yeah, I for sure was holding that in. Maybe it's for fear of rejection. Maybe it was for fear of that. I hate being. I've spent most of my life feeling very much alone in a crowd. I knew how to win the game, get A's, play the game, play the sports, do the athletic, do the stuff. But to sit with the substance, that was really, if I was going to show the real me and I was going to get rejected for that, would I go all the way back to just that lonely place when I was, early teenager or whatnot? I'm exploring some of those thoughts right now in real time, so forgive me for
that's great.
Around. But yeah, in many ways, that journey through Naked Sunday, I had been burying a lot of resentments. I hadn't confronted some things where I needed to make peace with people in my past. I needed to forgive a lot, and I needed to forgive myself, not least of which, for not fitting the mold that I thought I was supposed to be. And I realized I had to realize I was putting a lot of expectations on myself that I didn't actually care about, and to learn what did I actually care about. That was hard to then also be like, if people are going to get upset with that, like, I don't care. That's not what I came here for. That's not my purpose. And I'm going to have to be okay with that. So getting more comfortable with rejection, getting more comfortable with speaking my piece, because I have for sure, through the path of entrepreneurship and also leaving the religious background that I had, though I have an amazing relationship with my parents and siblings now, have gone a lonely path. I have certainly had a lot of fallouts in my day, and it's not fun. It's not fun if you're like, hey, I'm willing to stand for this thing. I'm going to go a different path than all these other people that might be more convenient to be around right now. So, yeah, I appreciate the question. I appreciate the opportunity just to float around in that one for a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And it makes me think about how, I was sort of considering as you were speaking that growing up in like a context where it sounds like there were very strict expectations. And then leaving that context, it sounds like you then created your own set of new strict expectations. And I'm curious, like for me, I started as a very socially awkward person. And then I read a bunch of books about like reading facial cues and like took improv comedy classes to like become more confident. And I like learned, similar to you, how to like win the game. And I'm curious what your journey was like to that. Like, were you a painfully awkward person who like read books about how to be a person like I did? Or, curious what your journey was like to finding your way into that second mold, excelling at it, and then being like, this is terrible, actually.
I love that you just said that. It's funny because just over the weekend I was talking with my buddy, my best friend Ian, and he was saying he did the same thing. I'm coming to realize my wife is a 5th grade teacher, and his wife is is a speech pathologist, so they have to deal with a lot with like special needs, or however it's described nowadays. I forget the terminology, but my wife has been pointing out that I exhibit a lot of like high functioning, like spectrum kind of stuff. Never occurred to me. And I have things with like time stuff, and I have like messing with my skin, like, and I get very like internally upset. All that to bring back to your question there of like, yes, I was painfully awkward. I was the eldest child as well. No concept of how to talk to people. So I like to think I was fairly functionally mute until about 17, which is when I sat my parents down, as most great stories go, like, fairy tale stuff. There was a girl and she was in my French class and I wanted to date this girl, and I should give some context. There was no such thing as premarital dating. I was supposed to have an arranged marriage. So put all these layers of like what's right and wrong around that, bucketed into like, here's a kid who doesn't know how to grapple with that in any way, shape, or form. There's no open conversation around what are relationships going to be? How do you navigate that? So all I knew how to talk about was school, and I could be good at that. And then I knew how to talk about sports. That was it. So like very just like this was the lane. I had a pretty uncomfortable relationship with authority. And then it was like I know how to be a good little cult follower. Like, I appreciate the person, whatever. and don't question it. Um, for me, my journey to learning how to understand people, I would say actually has been more of just a coaching role all along. Um, don't get me wrong, I've read plenty of things like you said, talked about like reading facial expressions. I love doing all that stuff. Um, but I've always been an observer. I like to just sit and watch. It sounds really creepy as I say this out loud. I just like to sit and watch people. That was mostly what my livelihood has come from, just sitting, watching, and then every now and then making a comment. Clearly I can talk a lot more than just that, but
that's why we have our podcasts.
Exactly. I gotta have like my sectioned off moments, much to the chagrin of my wife, that she knows I get the lecture mode. But I would say coaching gave me the greatest lens into how to figure out this stuff, because they gave me the answers, and I would just model like who was around me. I would just kind of be in a space. Like my first job out of college was at a CrossFit, and that also kind of has a little bit of a culty following too. But here's community. I'm watching what became my first mentor. How do you do this stuff? And with no context, is like, there's what other ways are there? All I knew was this way. So most of my stuff has been like observational stuff. I am obsessively curious, but like I love listening to what people's stories are. Hence why I have a podcast. Hence probably why you have a podcast.
Yeah.
I love just sitting and listening. I'm a great like auditory kind of learner. So just sitting down and watching somebody like share of themselves has always been the path for me to just figure it out. Which has made for some interesting things along the way, because with no skill set before that, it was definitely like sipping from a fire hose, learning how to deal with me for a long time. Probably still is in many ways, because I was just trying stuff out, and I wanted to reject all that was before me. So I was a little rambunctious with all of that along the way.
Yeah.
But coaching certainly has been the greatest gift in learning how to come to terms with all of those things and learning how to communicate better.
And so in your coaching journey, it sounds like you started in kind of the health space. You're still in the health and fitness space, but you've sort of expanded to more of like a purpose aspect to coaching. I'm curious what your sort of path has been, because I started as a nutrition coach, then I became a relationship coach, and now I'm a business coach. So, we all have our journeys.
God, I love you. In many ways, almost similar path. In the past 3 years, since I closed my last location, I have a little itch about doing it all over again, having a physical location again. So that's maybe me teasing it right here for the first time. But yeah, it was more just like a practical health situation. When I kind of branched off and did this new venture, it started as, hey, relationship coach, because what you'd start to see is like, it wasn't really a health problem. You'd get 5 conversations in, and it's like, well, things in the house are not going super great. Until we sort that out, then what are we going to do? And then who did I love talking to? I love to talk. We can also cater to a lot of business owners, because to me, entrepreneurs are super exciting. They're more open-minded. They're trying things. They're going after stuff, and they tend to attach a lot of their identity, and sometimes not the greatest way, to their work, but a lot of times is looking at it as legacy. And that's what inspires me. What got me to come back, and I've coached people in their business too, the same questions always came up. What I always kept noticing and kind of full form realized as I've come back is that no matter what it started with, it always had to come down to the relationship with yourself. And I heard from this guy's name is Greg Amundsen. He did a goal setting seminar, I don't know, 11 years ago or something like that, at my first location. And he told this story. The punchline of it is this quote: "Put your body in a place your mind can follow." And for me, that continues to stick out, because what happened with Naked Sunday? I got back in shape. I got back in touch with my body. Like I was not pointing my own core values at myself. I wasn't holding myself to my own standard. And as I did that, my body took the shape and the form of what I needed it to be. I got best shape of my life with less, which was seemingly crazy for me at the time. And what I tend to find is a lot of people, they get to this point of overwhelm, business owners specifically, when there is impact. A lot of times there's this internal scarcity, and they drive into more, as opposed to what is enough. And at that phase, it's a lot about letting go of things. And where do you go? You got to go back to your relationship with yourself. You got to check back in with your relationship with, which I would say is your core values. I think it's the easiest way to define ourselves. Then how is that expressing itself in both your time, where are you spending that? And 99% of the time, people I talk to are like, I haven't spent any time on self-care, health or otherwise, however you want to define, massages or journaling or all the stuff. At that point, you start to see like, that's what performance is. That is what gets poured into your work. I don't work with like high performance athletes anymore, at least in the sense of like, oh, you're going to go play on some court or some field on Saturday. This is the arena of business impact. And you start having a conversation around legacy, which to me is also a very spiritual conversation as well. How do you prepare this vehicle for that journey for as long as you can? Because you're trying to leave as much impact as possible. You need more years on your life. It's a long way of coming back to how did I come back? No matter what it came back to, you got to respect the body. And in so many ways, when you go inward first, whatever transformations and changes and whatnot go on there, it immediately starts to replicate itself outside of you, both in your immediate relationships, your marriage, your family, your friends, but then also what is business comprised of? It's comprised of relationships.
Absolutely.
No matter how we hack it. So that intermediary, coming back to that is kind of the way, because it's easy to talk about business afterward. It's easy to talk about relationships. When you feel good, you're not reacting. You're being proactive. You're being assertive. You're being stable. You're actually checking in on like, am I showing up as the person I promised all these people I was going to show up as? And in many ways, the body can represent that, whatever function you need it to be. You need to have enough energy and the time and space to show up. If you don't, if you're dead or you don't have any energy, what are we doing here? It's you're not gonna pull it off. So I think hopefully I answered that question properly.
Yeah, I'm curious to ask you a question about this for purely selfish reasons. This morning I had like a huge business deadline that I was procrastinating on, and I also am in the middle of a creative project that I really wanted to work on. And the fact that I had to eat breakfast, I got so mad. I was like, how dare you, body? Like, I don't have enough time anyway. Like, you need food now, and I'm curious, like, if you've ever experienced that, or if you have advice for anyone like me who might feel like, oh, it's like the last thing I want to do is take care of my body. Like, I have brain things to do and business things to do. It feels like I have so much resentment about the fact that my body needs to be cared for. And I'm curious if you have any tricks for that.
I do need to introduce you to Ian. Oh my God.
I think he sent me his contact info, but yeah.
I did. He talks about that thing all the time. He's like, I'll get so focused on work, and then like somebody has to remind me to eat. And I'm like, the same thing. This is great. I think for one, you can't be so hard on yourself. So a lot of people start to get into this perfectionist thing around like, oh, you got to have your meals at this time and all the da-da-da-da-da. Our body's a pretty beautiful thing. It can adapt. I think the bigger thing is reflecting on, is this a constant? Is this a routine? Is this a steady behavior? You strike me as somebody who's pretty observant about your behaviors. So in that moment, I'd be like, oh, well, this is just a test. Can I do this? That way it takes the pressure off. Like, I had to eat right now. Anytime I start to hear the have to, should kind of language, based on what? Who told me I had to? But on the other side of that, I also ask myself, especially if you're going to show up for some creative endeavor or whatever it is, most deadlines we're putting on ourselves most of the time are self-imposed, and we're making it a rush because of something. And I think about it in like the parallel of if we get sick. It's really hard to think about. Maybe perhaps now since the pandemic, like people are a little more thoughtful, but we're starting to see it change again, or go back to where it was. Like, I got a little tickle in my throat. I'll power through.
Mm.
Not thinking about, well, what if you're actually sick? And what if you get like 3 more people sick that day? What we're immediately thinking about is like, I don't want to be seen as less than for calling in because I need to get the work done.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if we can, especially if you're in a leadership role, if we don't think 4 feet past our nose, you're not going to see like, well, okay, by you going in and you getting that next person sick, or maybe the next 3 people sick, what do you do for productivity for the collective?
Mm-hmm.
I think that part there is really hard, and asking yourself, hey, is my energy going to be appropriate? So when it comes to something like food, well, what's 5 minutes? And I say, hey, you sent me a message right before we hopped on here, like, hey, let you know, might be a couple minutes behind. I'll send you the link when we're ready to go. Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Like, all you need to do is communicate with people. Half the time when people send me a message, like, hey, gotta let you know, I'm sick right now. You sent me a message last week. Hey, I'm feeling under the weather.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, thanks for letting me know. And I feel valued as an individual, as the recipient of that, because like, wow, they really want to bring their best energy to me. They
Mm-hmm.
actually care about putting their best foot forward. Wow. That it might be uncomfortable for a moment, but as somebody who's going to be on the receiving end of that, I see that as self-awareness. It's like, thank you. You're looking for a meaningful exchange. You're not just looking to pass the time with me.
Right. We're not
All
checking
right.
a box.
We're not checking a box. And, not everybody's going to react that way. But in what I've discovered, and I'm going to go on a limb and say that people who are listening to this are also fairly thoughtful, insightful, introspective humans who are going to go, that person must be having a day. They're feeling sick. And they actually gave a damn enough about me and my experience to communicate that.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? I'm really glad they took care of themselves. That, to me, is the way I've worked through some of those things, because the high performer, whatever ideology in our own psyche is like, well, what is high performance, and in what time frame? Like, what does that mean? So that's how I would tackle that from 2 different lenses.
Mm-hmm.
Usually it's just mostly our own self-imposed pressures.
There's one thing I have to say before I ask you my next question, which is
Sure.
Last week, someone else canceled a podcast recording with me and said, I'm sorry, this is so unprofessional, but I'm sick and I can't go on your podcast. And I was like, that's not unprofessional. That's anti-professional, which is the entire point of the podcast. So please enjoy your day and do not worry about it. Like, that's the point, is like, it's not unprofessional to accurately describe the fact that you can't show up the way that you want to show up for something you said you'd do, and then reschedule for a time that you can. Because like you said, a lot of these deadlines are artificial. And we can really get kind of trapped in that. And now my brain forgot the other question I had for you.
I love that you said that. I love that you said it. And I think there's a lot of shame wrapped around in that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of shame. Like, this person's going to see me as less than. No, the thoughtful person who's been there is going to go, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Go take care of yourself, feel better. We'll be there.
Okay, now I remember the question. So we haven't gotten much into your spiritual life,
Sure.
And something I'm sort of working through right now is this sort of like hustle demon that I feel like convinces me that I shouldn't be stopping to eat or stopping to hydrate. And I'm like, why does this like scratchy voice in my head convince me that not resting is better for my work, when I know that if I take a half day or something like that, sometimes I get my best work done that day? And I'm curious, like, in terms of, either a very pragmatic sense or a spiritual sense, what your feeling is around that incessant drive to never stopping until we're like non-functional as entrepreneurs.
From a spiritual sense, I think there's and I can only speak to really myself on this, but like, I feel like there's a feeling of lack within ourselves. I can't remember who I heard this from, but like, the most successful people tend to be, in some way, think that they're better than others, but also at the same time have a massive gap in their heart, like that I'm not good enough at the same time, which is an ironic paradox, because you have to be able to see like, this is how things could be better, but at the same time, a drive to get better is part of this interesting drive. For somebody in that position, though, like you're saying, often we forget to like take stock of where we're at, and we don't actually understand our minimums. There's a difference between being busy and being productive. And the current, which is, I believe, is changing with the nature of how work looks nowadays. But for so long, it's been like your time is your production. You have to be here from 9 to 5. You better be working. Okay. It didn't encourage competence. I rather have that person who's like, I can get this job done in 5 minutes. Cool. Do whatever else you want with the rest of your day. I don't want to be your babysitter, because that all you're doing is manufacturing codependent relationships constantly. If we really want to have great success across the board, what are you looking to do? You're looking to create self-governorship, self-autonomy. What I would suggest there, especially like time audits, most people don't actually look back on their past 3 to 4 months and be like, what was the things that I really needed to do? What were the things that actually moved the needle? People go out and create tons of content. I just did this for myself. I was creating all this content. Yeah, I was having fun, but it wasn't moving the needle on the thing I actually needed, at least for this next season of life. And if you can establish what your minimum effective dosage is, you're going to realize like, that's all I need to hit. And then the rest of your focus, your energy, whatever, can be poured into probably self-care. Because most people are, it's like grind your face off mentality. Like, I sleep 4 hours a night and I can do it. And like, I'm crushing Mountain Dews and like, don't get me wrong, I love Mountain Dew, Diet Mountain Dew, ironically, but like, that idea that like your rest is like, you don't need it is a massive fallacy. In the training world, there's a saying, it's not how hard you train, it's how well you recover. Because if you're constantly maxing out every day and you're not allowing yourself enough time to recover, you don't have enough juice to go back the next day. You're going to get only 80%. Yes, maybe one day you can, but like, you're not building a reservoir. And that's hard. I think most people have to go through a few cycles of the burnout cycle. Like, I couldn't sustain this past a week or a month or whatever it is. Asking yourself what is enough, not more. Start with enough. Most people are like, I need to make $1 million this year. Okay. As opposed to, what do I need to pay for my bills? What's the easiest way to get there? And then what is my body going to need and my mind going to need? And what are the relationships that I need? Like, what do they need for those to prosper? Now, with that stability underneath us, when we get to the next level, we get to the next crossroads, we have options again, because now that we're actually stable, you're going to see options show up in your life. Your biggest challenge there is to say no to say no, because you're going to have plenty of people wanting your attention because you actually have time and space to give it. Now you have to make sure you don't just give it away again to go be busy all over again. So my suggestion for anybody listening about that part is, what is productivity? If you're a business owner, more often than not, it's like, what's making you the sales directly? What's the quickest to cash? More often than not, it's reach outs. Go talk to people, go invite them to a conversation, and then have the next conversation and then sell them on the thing. Very practical. But after that, maybe make some content. What's the most efficient way you could do that, if you need to keep the conversations going or reflect on what you were just doing, and then go nurture your relationships. Not least of which the one with yourself, because with more energy, all those sales you're going to show up to, you're going to have better energy. People want to buy from people who are excited about doing business with them, who are like, I'm here for you, yo, like, let's go. So that's how I would look at that from that perspective. The spiritual sense is, you have to accept that you're enough. Like, you as a human being showing up as just truly yourself, that is enough. That's hard. That's really hard. Like, oh, if I don't have $1 million in the bank account, or, didn't pull up with a Rolls Royce or whatever, it's like, people don't give a shit about that. Let's just be real. They don't care. They really don't care.
Especially not these days.
No, they care. At the end of the day, we've always just cared about, and this is a hard one for most people, people just care about themselves. And that's not a bad thing. Because if you know that, and you then just start to ask, like, what do you care about yourself? Then you can be of service. Then they're like, oh, cool. Like, how do I support you? Because I don't have a lot of people doing that for me in my life. And I don't care if you don't have the Benz or the McMansion or whatever. It's about that soulful connection. And if you don't have the energy to be there for it, you're going to miss the really important questions like you're asking right now. Like these are great questions. You got me really thinking. Like, man, wow, I see this relation. I feel the relationship growing because I have to be introspective and I have to answer something of substance. It's not easy. So, yeah, really compliment to you at the same time. Like,
Thank
awesome.
you. Yeah.
As my dog is growling in the background.
Yeah, it's okay if you need to give him a pet or something like that.
Daddy's going to give you a treat because you're being a good boy. There you go.
Oh.
Hop in.
He likes to hop in on the calls. That's good. Yeah, that's why I have my door shut, because otherwise my kittens would be all over us. The something I wanted to sort of latch on with what you were saying there about sort of the idea that you need all of these things is, I feel there is so much in especially the coaching space where there's a lot of manufactured insecurity. There's so many people every day telling you that you're not enough, that you don't have enough, that you're not meeting the KPIs of your peers, that you're one step behind. And I think that it's like a psychic assault on a lot of us who are trying to be entrepreneurs and participate in the space. And it's part of why I've created everything I've created, is just to completely disagree with all of that. And I think you're right that there actually is an inherent enoughness to being alive. And something I have been connecting with lately is that there is a creative benevolence on the planet Earth that we've been abstracted from, that we have access to at all times. Like, I know how to forage. Worst case scenario, like, I'll go pick some roots and fry them up, like, I'll be fine. But if I log into Instagram for too long, I'm like, oh gosh, I'm not at 10K a month. Like, wow, what am I, like a dummy? Like, how come all these guys can do it? And with what you were saying about that gap between believing you can do a lot and then also feeling insecure, I think for me, it's knowing I have the potential to be great and feeling like I have not yet lived up to that potential where the insecurity is. And I think that's where the friction is. But I agree that my metrics are muddied, because my actual metric is like human impact. Like, how many people did I make like cry from like a sincere breakthrough today is actually my metric, but you can't track that on a dashboard. So I guess I'm just looking at like my reach,
I mean, you could just have a checkboard in the background, a little whiteboard with some check marks for the week.
Sometimes people do tell me. So yeah, that could be my own personal metric. That's true.
My wife and we had it for a little bit. It was a check. It's probably not the greatest idea, but it was basically a whiteboard who's been right. So
that's funny.
Yeah. If anybody wants to put a little friction into their relationship, give it a shot. My wife was on board and suggested bringing it back recently, which we'll see. But yeah, I think that's it. I think you bring up a great point. That's hard to put on some stat sheet and then slide across the table and account and be like, this is our numbers for the year. I'm like that. But on your deathbed, what are you going to care about? And I don't know, like, I'll share this. It sounds creepy again as I say it, but I'll give the context. Like, my strange addiction is tears, because for a long time, as I mentioned in my life, I felt very alone. I didn't know how to connect on a meaningful level. And I believe crying, happy or sad tears, is the most honest expression of human emotion. You're saying, like, this is me. You've impacted me. I trust you enough with this realness in front of you. And if we want to like zoom out and bring it to business context, for anybody who doesn't think that that's not meaningful from a business standpoint, like, if somebody's willing to trust you with that level of depth, it's not really hard to fathom that they're going to trust you with their credit card. They're going to trust you with whatever service you're providing, and they'll be more loyal. But it's incumbent upon you to create the space before that for them to be even willing to go there. That's not easy. And that's where I think I keep bringing it back to the self-care pieces. Like, if your head's not on straight, if your heart's not aligned, and if you're coming from a place of scarcity, you're not even giving them the chance to be in that space with you. You essentially set up a codependent relationship, or just a straight expectation that doesn't create an abundant exchange of reciprocity. Like, I'm giving of myself. I'm giving you this space. I'm giving of my time. And when people get that, not everybody's going to hand over their checkbook and say, like, take all my money, but you better believe they're going to be talking about you. you better believe they're going to be referring their friends. You better believe that if there's ever a problem, they're not that you can solve. They're not going to go price check everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to come back to you because you can't unfeel that. You can't unsee that truth.
Mm-hmm.
And that scares some people. Don't get me wrong, because some people have never done that. I'm sure you've been in that space where like, whoa, like that person dropped some heavy stuff
Mm-hmm.
and they've never talked about it. Well, that's a privilege. That's a privilege. But if you're not sorted out, they're going to drop that stuff on you, and God bless you. Like, I don't know where that's going to go. So, I love that. That's your metric. That's fire. That should, you know what? That should be just the new whiteboard across the thing. Mm-hmm. How many people you hold space and allow them to cry today?
There's when I perform, I always say if I didn't make anybody cry, then it wasn't a good performance. Because I try to like really take people on a journey of like seeing them, and then also like talking about forgiveness and talking about the complexity of life and all of that. And so I usually get people to cry, but yeah, I'm similar. I love it. I love like when people cry in front of me, I'm just like, it's like a special type of adrenaline. Totally get that. Something I wanted to talk to you about, especially, so I think I've mentioned I'm also a cult survivor on a much smaller scale. But I think that in those spaces, those feelings that you and I are describing, that transformative experience, that breakthrough is sort of hijacked. Like I participated in Landmark briefly. That was an awful transformative experience where I actually did walk away with some good stuff. So it's complicated. But then I think about, I'm obsessed with like mega church exposés. So I think about like Gwen Shamblin and people like that who hijacked that intimacy and that trust and that take out your credit card for me kind of thing. And I'm curious, for me, having been in that cult situation, I think I just want everything in my body to not be the person who took advantage of me. And I'm almost grateful that I got to witness them because it showed me all the things I could be that I'm choosing not to be. And I'm curious what your orientation is around being a transformational leader without the temptation of taking advantage of that vulnerability, because so many people do.
I really appreciate you bringing this up, because you're actually tapping into my greatest fear in this life. In a punchline, it's being seen as a fraud, but ultimately it's becoming a cult leader, essentially. And in my own small way, in my last facility, I in a microcosm was that. Internally, here, buddy, come on, daddy's got treats for you. In this small ecosystem, and essentially me operating from this place of internal scarcity, lacking self-love and self-compassion, and then having this, which manifests itself into this massive space with a big staff and all these other obligations and everything else I was trying to get going at the same time. In many ways, like front facing, it was like, oh, I want to help you, like let's lose weight, and it was great. But oftentimes when push came to shove and there became these moments of friction, it was a lot of like that like control thing. And I see a lot of businesses in general do the same thing, and they don't see it. They don't even see it for themselves, like, because anything can become a cult.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
So from that sense, that was one of my biggest fears, because you spend enough time around the self-improvement space, whatever, you basically start learning all the tricks. Like there's a process to all this stuff.
It's very procedural.
It is. And they're powerful. Like I have a friend, I was on his podcast. I was recommending Never Split the Difference, which is basically a way of helping people lower their anxiety to come to better sales conclusions within themselves. And he's like, don't you think this is a little dangerous to teach people? And I was like, well, no, because essentially it's teaching people how to be empathetic. It is what it is. The tools are there. It's a matter of who's housing the conversation. I used to be very resentful. So we'll bring it to kind of where I've shifted on things. I used to be very resentful of my past. And it was a lot of, I don't want to be that. I don't want to be that. But of course, like you can't not think about something. So it would essentially rear its ugly head, because I'm thinking about like, don't be this thing. And how do I not be that thing? And I would not be free within myself. And what I started to recognize was like, I was so resentful of all the things that it was, that I couldn't see that because I was blaming my problems on it, I was failing to recognize, like, I also have to thank my past for the successes I've had, Tyson, you need to be respectful right now, buddy. Here's one more treat. And that shift right there, which is a really hard one, because essentially we start confronting the victim mentality within ourselves of like, I was the victim. Okay. For me to stay the victim has become a choice. I am choosing to not let the past be what it is. I chose not to see all the lessons because it's easier to just say that. And like, that was a problem. And once I decided to like, I'm going to be grateful for everything, including all the bad, whatever. Because I've also wanted to be forgiven for many things. Ty, you got to be respectful, buddy. I've wanted to be forgiven for my own failures, because sometimes you just don't know.
Oh yeah.
And if I'm not willing to forgive others, how can I expect to be forgiven as well? That was a really, that was probably one of the deepest parts of the past few years of sitting with that. I think that's where it lies. Anything has the power to become that. These are all just tools, and 1,000 different things are going to pop up, and everybody's going to pitch it like this is the next great. No, it's all just being recycled under a different language, my own stuff included. Like, that's all it is. You make it contextually appropriate to your stuff. The intention, I think, is the most important part. And I think for people that are looking for a transformative experience, because if you are going to go on a transformative journey, you have to change everything. Like, it's not about losing the weight. It's about your relationships, your work, all the things, the language is going to interface with your past, all the stuff. You're going to go on a journey with a coach or somebody, and you're going to touch on all the stuff. And that's sensitive. It feels very vulnerable. You're giving it's in many senses a spiritual pursuit that can get weird. So I think maybe a practical question for somebody who's looking to go on that type of experience is look for people who are willing to say, like, I'm trying to put myself out of a job, sign the billion-year contract or whatever, that kind of stuff. Like, cool. Also look for people who are willing to say, I don't know, because that's a sign of intellectual humility. But like, this happens to be a way I'm going to do it. We're good either way. That's the stuff. Everything, like whether it's landmark or whatever, like they're all cult-ish in some sense. It depends on what level of involvement you get into. And I think if we could start just looking at them as lessons, I think there's a lot of freedom around that. But that's what I would suggest for a lot of people. But essentially you got to look at, I mean, it sounded like you had a very similar experience to me with, or at least the acknowledgement, like, well, I see now what a cult can turn into. I can go talk to a staff member who's at the ground level of almost any company and be like, oh, I kind of get what's going on at the top, because it trickles down into the language, how they interact, like from their energy, how they go around, like all that stuff. I'm fortunate that because I saw some of those things earlier on, navigated it, became it. Oh, well, now I'm just aware. And what am I, 36? So like, cool, at 36, I can probably be more impactful without being a raging asshole. And the other side of that is I go out of my way to choose people for my inner circle to mostly keep me in check. A lot of people say, the average of the 5 people you want to spend, like, oh, so we can grow. No, for me, it's like, yo, get back in line, man. Like, and I distinctly say, like, hey, my core values. If you watch me straying, smack me upside the head. I already got more ambition than I know what to do with. Like, that I'm not worried about. It's the other stuff. Like, never forget, you're also just a human being who wants to go talk about some heavy stuff. You're going to put yourself in some spots. Integrity in those places, making sure you get some people that are in integrity and are willing to speak up. Those are some things that I would suggest for anybody who's kind of pursuing some of those thoughts around that. But yeah, that was a tough one. It's a tough one to see it from gratitude, no matter what lens of a cult we grew up in, whether it's like your own family unit or school or religion,
corporations.
Corporation. They're all the same thing. They're all structures with some rules and regs, and somebody
plenty
said
of hierarchy.
No matter where we go. And there is value to it at a certain stage in our life, but there's a certain place when we start getting to that whole self-actualization spot, like, what's the meaning of my life? Where you're like, I don't need somebody else to govern over me.
Mm-hmm.
That's a different shift. But like, what are the lessons from all of my past that was valuable that I shouldn't just throw away?
Mm-hmm.
That's an easy one to do. Like, oh, it was bad. I had a bad experience, or I had a bad ending. Okay, but not everything was bad. Like, something helped. Right? So yeah,
I feel
I'm
like
ranting now.
no, yeah, I'm with you, and I feel like we could talk all day. I'm like one or two questions away from sort of our closing questions, but
Sure.
but yeah, to sort of echo what you said there, I think there is always something to learn out of those bad experiences, like, getting sold to in a manipulative way and then learning how to sell in a manipulative way is the basis for my entire business, because it's all about unlearning that stuff. And if I hadn't learned it and been a victim of it, if you will, I wouldn't have the fire to destroy it and dismantle it. And also, yeah, like you said, landmark, I think I got so much out of my first landmark session. The second one felt extremely abusive and really, really scary and bad. But the first one, like, I had some really big breakthroughs in terms of taking accountability for who I was. And I think that was really positive. So yeah, it's sort of, what can we take out of both the parts that harm us and move us forward, and work that into our own practice. But yeah, we might have to do another episode to get into all the juicy stuff. But now I have to ask you, what are you currently working on or calling in that you're excited to sort of share with the specific community?
Well, right now I've come back to my little tagline. You see, I'm wearing my old "Look Better Naked" thing, but I'm inspired to help people look better naked inside and out. And what does that mean? Well, if you have a greater sense of self and you start to nurture that, as we've talked about all those things, the outside kind of falls in suit. That's not about, six-pack abs and all that, though that does start to happen. I'm inspired to help people go on a similar journey. And by that, I mean just like, hey, I'll walk with you. I ain't going to tell you how to live your life. I'm going to share what I've learned. Hopefully it lands with all the language we just were talking about for everybody. Like, I'm not here to tell you how to live your life. But to me, I find, like, once we've aligned our body, it allows space for your soul to evolve. Mm-hmm. You can now manifest things like the business that you always wanted to create, the legacy. I love talking to people who they're thinking about the end of life, not in like this morbid sense, but like, what am I leaving behind? Mm-hmm. Oftentimes it takes like the ability to start thinking 10, 15, 20, 30 years in advance. You've lived some life. Money's not the problem. Mm-hmm. It's the impact. And impact is a hard thing to define.
Or even control the flow of, in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. I mean, for some people, it might be like, listen, I got to have one more meaningful conversation with my grandkid. That's awesome. Other people, it's want to build the school so that, everybody who comes after me who struggle with the same things can have an easier path. That's exciting. To me, though, it's got to start with like, hey, you're grounded within yourself. I can help you align yourself with that. So what I start everybody with is called an alignment audit. We take you through three things. We define your core values. I made up this thing, which works very well for me. I call it the alignment, the anti-value method. Mm-hmm. We audit your time and then your energy, some basic things. And then if people want some support afterwards, I do this foundations thing. Basically, let's get a foundation going and then we'll make the next decision. And then we'll just have some fun together. And then maybe they'll see my dog too, and he'll just like woof at people all the entire time because he's a little sassy boy with his little bumblebee handkerchief right now.
That's very cute. Okay, so that's great to know. So I hear who you're calling in. And so I'm curious, if those people feel called to find you, what is the best way for them to connect with you?
Sure. The best way to connect with me, let's go with Instagram. At Naked Sunday Studios is probably the best way to go. Hi, Daddy's almost done. Naked Sunday Studios is the best way to do it. You'll see bright pink and neon blue colors all over the place. You'll see me, probably my dog, probably my wife wander around. Just send me a message. Promise Not that crazy. Well,
No, yeah,
crazy.
that's what I did.
Maybe a little bit crazy. I love that you messaged me. That was what I love how you messaged me. You're just like, hey, yo, I saw your name. Like, let's chat. I'm like, hell yeah, this is gonna be cool.
Yeah, you got to follow that intuition.
Yeah, you got to follow that intuition. I love people that like lead in with curiosity. Hey, if nothing else, sometimes let's just hop on a call and I'll point you in the right direction because 99%, like, I sure as hell don't have all the answers, but I'm fortunate to know a lot of good people.
Whoa, he's getting escalated. Okay.
He's got a sassy side of him. But yeah.
Well, then the last question I have for you today is just, knowing this time and space, knowing that you have people listening right now, is there anything in your heart, your soul, your mind that wants to be said?
Yeah. I think if you're going through a tough spot in life, look into the eyes of the people that you love, and all your answers are right there. That was one of the most profound lessons I've ever learned. And in many ways, my wife saved me because I looked into her eyes when I was feeling pretty low and run down, on my dog. And even your enemies, which is an ironic thing. They got all the answers right there. And if you can learn to love that, the good and the bad and everything in between, I think you're going to be surprised what you find on the other side. And at the end of the day, it's all love. So just love yourself and things will work out. Tyson, you want a treat?
He's decided. He's like, this podcast interview is over. Well, Caleb, thank you so much for being here. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I'm sure we'll have many more. And I'll be sure to put the links for you in the description. But with that, I will say farewell to the Anti-Professional Podcast listeners, and thank you for tuning in.
Thank you.
All right. And with that, the 13th episode of the Anti-Professional Podcast comes to a close. As a reminder, this was an interview with Caleb Nelson of Naked Sunday. And this podcast is sponsored lovingly by identitypending.com, a digital marketing agency for bold businesses who want to do stuff that is not stupid or boring on the internet. And if you feel so called, you can look up my book, A Pocket Full of Seeds, on Amazon for tales and tribulations of a queer, awkward human being with trauma navigating the world. Blessings to you on your journey. Thanks for listening and have a great day.